Samuel was not looking for anything unusual that afternoon. He was simply walking toward the river the same way he did every few days. His ranch was wide, open, and quiet, stretching across dry grasslands and tall cottonwood trees. The river was the lifeline for his cattle, and checking the water level had become part of his routine. He had walked this path so many times that he almost never expected anything new. But that day, something different waited for him near the riverbank. The sound of the flowing water reached his ears first. It was steady and gentle, like it always was. He stepped over a few stones, brushing dust off his boots as he moved forward. Samuel was thinking about simple things: if the cattle needed moving, if the barn roof still leaked, if the old saddle needed repair. He was not thinking about anyone else, and he certainly was not expecting to see another person. That part of the land was usually empty, but as he got closer, he saw a shape near the river, someone kneeling by the water. He slowed his steps without meaning to. At first, he could only see long, dark hair falling over the person's back. The woman was washing clothes in the river, her hands moving with slow, practiced rhythm. She had not heard him yet. Or perhaps she had but chose not to react. Her focus remained on the water. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. He was not suspicious, only surprised. He rarely saw travelers out here, and even fewer who looked as tired as this woman. He stayed still for a moment, watching quietly, unsure whether to approach or give her space. Then something else caught his eye. Something that made his expression soften with concern. Her dress was torn. Not just a little on the side or sleeve, but badly ripped in several places, as if it had been caught on thorns or rough ground. Some parts were frayed, almost hanging loose. He felt a tug in his chest. The way she sat, the way she washed the clothes, the way her shoulders dropped slightly, she looked strong and proud, yet also worn down. She did not appear weak, but she did look like someone who had been through a long journey. Samuel knew enough about life to understand that people sometimes carried heavy burdens quietly, without asking anyone for help. He hesitated again as he stepped forward. He did not want to frighten her, so he cleared his throat softly, a gentle sound to let her know someone was nearby. The woman's hands paused in the water. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. Her face was calm but guarded. She did not look afraid. She only looked like someone who had learned not to trust quickly. Samuel lifted one hand in a peaceful gesture. "Afternoon," he said softly. His voice carried respect, not force. The woman did not answer. She simply looked at him for a moment, then returned her gaze to the river. She seemed to prefer silence. He understood that. Some people speak with words, and some speak with quiet actions. She looked like the second kind. Samuel took another slow step forward, careful not to invade her space. Now that he was closer, he could see the torn dress more clearly. The fabric had been pulled apart in several places. She had tried to sew parts of it, but the repairs were rough, done in a hurry. The river water made the cloth cling to her slightly, revealing just how damaged it really was. It must have been uncomfortable for her, but she kept working, washing each cloth with patience. Samuel felt troubled watching her struggle like that. She deserved dignity, safety, and perhaps a little help. But he knew he could not rush in too fast. People who lived close to the land, especially those who lived through difficult paths, valued their independence deeply. Offering help needed to be done carefully. He opened the small pack he carried on his saddle. Inside, he always kept a blanket for emergencies. Without walking too close, he placed the folded blanket on a large, flat stone near her. The woman glanced at it but said nothing. "It's clean," he added quietly. "You can use it if you want." She looked at him again. Her eyes carried a depth he could not fully read. Maybe caution. Maybe curiosity. Maybe exhaustion. After a moment, she gently pulled the blanket toward her and laid it across her lap. It was a small gesture, but it meant she accepted the offer. Samuel felt relieved. It was a beginning, even if it was small. He did not ask questions. He did not try to force conversation. Instead, he stood nearby, giving her room but staying close enough to show he was not dangerous. The sun shone across the river, making the water sparkle. Wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying the smell of dust and wild plants. The woman continued washing clothes. But Samuel noticed her movements were slower now, not from weakness but from the thought that someone was watching over her in a gentle way. She did not seem frightened anymore, only cautious. After a long moment, Samuel finally spoke again, choosing his words carefully. "You look like you've come a long way," he said softly, trying to sound respectful and not intrusive. She paused, her hands stilled in the water. Then she turned her face toward him just enough to be polite. She spoke in simple English, her voice quiet but steady. "Long walk," she said. Her accent was gentle, clear, and carried the sound of someone who did not waste words. Samuel nodded slowly. He did not push for more. He simply wanted her to know he heard her. He noticed her shoulders relax the smallest amount, almost unnoticeable. She finished washing the last piece of clothing and squeezed the water out carefully before laying it on a warm rock to dry. Then she held the blanket tightly around herself. Samuel realized she must have been cold. Torn clothes, long travels, and river water did not mix well with the afternoon breeze. "Do you have enough food?" he asked softly. She looked him directly in the eyes for the first time. Her expression did not show fear. It showed strength, as if she had survived challenges before, and did not want pity, only fairness. After a moment, she shook her head once. Samuel nodded and slowly opened his pack again. He took out some bread and dried fruit, placing them near the edge of the blanket. She studied the food for a moment, before gently taking it. He watched as she ate slowly, politely, not like someone desperate or greedy. She carried dignity in everything she did. Samuel stood quietly, watching the river flow. He did not want to pressure her to leave or stay, but he also did not want to walk away from someone who clearly needed more help than just a blanket and a few pieces of bread. "Ranch is not far," he finally said in a gentle tone. "There is shade, fresh water. You can rest if you want." The woman looked at the river for a long time before answering. She was thinking, measuring his words, trying to understand if he was sincere. She lifted her eyes again, and in them, he saw both strength and fatigue. She did not say yes, but she also did not say no. She simply stood up slowly, gathered the clothes she had washed, wrapped the blanket tightly around herself, and nodded, once in agreement, simple and quiet. Samuel felt something shift inside him, something he could not name yet. He led the way, walking slowly, so she would feel comfortable. And as they moved away from the river, he realized he would remember this moment for the rest of his life, the moment he saw a woman in need of help, and understood, deeply, that her silence was not weakness but courage. It was the beginning of a story neither of them expected. The walk back to the ranch was quiet. Samuel did not rush, and the Apache woman, Niena, followed a few steps behind him. She walked with careful footsteps, as if weighing every sound, every movement around her. The blanket he had given her was wrapped tightly around her shoulders, covering the torn dress underneath. The evening sun lowered slowly, spreading soft colors across the sky: orange, gold, and pale red. It made the land look gentler, but he knew the world felt more harsh to someone traveling alone. Samuel kept glancing back now and then, not to check on her, but to make sure the pace was comfortable. Each time he looked, she met his eyes briefly before lowering her gaze again. There was a kind of quiet understanding between them. She did not speak much, and he did not force her to. When the ranch finally came into view, Niena stopped walking for a moment. She stared at the wide open field, the barn with its old wooden walls, the house standing proudly even though its paint had faded through the years. To her, it was more than a ranch. It was safety, or at least the closest thing to safety she had seen in days. Samuel noticed her pause and gave her time. He knew she was thinking, maybe wondering if she should trust him, wondering what might happen next, wondering if she had made the right decision by following him. She took a quiet breath and continued walking. They reached the large corral area where some horses lifted their heads, curious about the newcomers. The ranch dog, A brown and white border collie trotted over to Samuel, but slowed when it saw Nienna. The dog tilted its head, studying her with gentle eyes. She froze for a moment, unsure if the dog was friendly, but the wagging tail told her everything she needed to know. "It's all right," Samuel said softly. "He just wants to say hello." Nienna reached down and let the dog sniff her hand. When the dog pressed its nose against her fingers, she smiled faintly. Her first smile since they met. Samuel noticed it and felt a small warmth spread through his chest. Even a quiet smile held meaning when it came from someone who trusted. Slowly, Samuel guided her toward a shaded area near the barn, where a wooden bench stood. "You can sit here," he said gently. "It's quiet. No one will bother you." She nodded once and sat down, placing the folded clothes beside her. The blanket still covered her shoulders, and she held it tightly, as if it were armor made of soft fabric. Samuel did not rush away. He wanted her to feel welcome, not abandoned, but he also didn't want to overwhelm her with questions. "You must be tired," he said after a moment, his voice soft. She looked at him, her eyes still cautious, but no longer cold. "Yes," she said quietly. Her voice held a mix of exhaustion and strength. Samuel leaned against one of the barn posts, keeping a respectful distance. "You don't have to explain anything," he continued. "But if you ever want help with anything, you can ask." She stared at the ground for a few seconds before speaking. "I do not ask," she said simply. "I do what I can." Her words were not prideful, they were honest. She was someone who had learned to survive without depending on others. Samuel admired that. He knew people like her carried quiet stories inside, stories that were often heavier than they sounded. "I understand," he said gently. "But sometimes, even strong people need a moment to rest." She didn't respond, but the way her shoulders loosened slightly told him she heard him. Samuel went inside the house for a moment and returned with a small basket. Inside were apples, bread, and a clean jug of water. He placed them near her without making a big gesture. Nienna looked at the basket, then at him, as if surprised by his continued kindness. "For you," he said. She reached for the basket slowly and touched the items one by one, almost as if making sure they were real. "Thank you," she whispered, the words soft but sincere. After a while, she ate slowly, carefully. Samuel watched the sunset from where he stood. The sky grew darker, and the first stars appeared. The ranch grew still except for the distant calls of night birds and the soft movement of the wind. He didn't try to leave her alone in the dark. He stayed near, letting her finish eating at her own pace. When she finally spoke again, it was unexpected. "Why you help me?" she asked, her eyes lifting toward him. Samuel took a breath before answering. He wanted to choose his words with care. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "And because you didn't ask for anything. That says a lot about a person." She studied him, trying to read his intentions. "Many people see me and walk away," she said. "They think I am trouble." He shook his head. "I don't see trouble." Then he paused and added, "I see someone who walked a long way and didn't give up." Something in her expression softened. Not completely, she was not someone who opened her heart easily, but enough that he felt she was beginning to trust him. Even a little. After finishing her meal, she wrapped the blanket more securely and looked toward the hills, as if remembering where she came from. Samuel stepped closer, though still keeping respectful space. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "No one will harm you, and no one will force you to do anything." She nodded slowly. "I know," she murmured. "You speak with calm." Samuel smiled faintly. "I try my best." He noticed then how weary she looked. The long journey had clearly drained her strength, and the torn dress likely added discomfort. He didn't want her to stay outside in the cold night air. "You can rest in the small guest shed," he said softly. "It's warm, and there's a mattress. I'll stay nearby in case you need anything." She hesitated again, this time longer. Her eyes shifted between him and the quiet building beside the barn. Samuel could see her seriousness, her need to feel safe before stepping into any enclosed space. He stepped back a few feet and pointed to the door. "You can look inside first," he said. "There's nothing there but blankets and a place to sleep. You will have your own space. No one will disturb you." She rose slowly, holding the blanket tight, and walked toward the shed. Samuel remained where he was, letting her inspect the place without pressure. She opened the door and looked inside. The small room smelled of old wood and clean air. A lantern hung from a hook. A neatly folded blanket and a simple bed waited in the corner. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she turned and looked at Samuel. There was no fear in her eyes now, only caution mixed with a kind of fragile relief. "This is good," she said quietly. "I'm glad," he replied. She stepped inside, placing her clothes near the small bed. She did not close the door fully at first. She kept it slightly open, watching Samuel through the narrow gap. He understood that she needed to see him, to be sure he wasn't leaving or doing anything unexpected. "I'll stay right here," he assured her. "Only until you sleep." She nodded again and slowly closed the door halfway, the closest thing to trust she could give at that moment. Samuel sat on a wooden crate outside the shed, listening to the gentle sounds of the night. Inside, he could hear her moving softly, settling down, adjusting the blanket. There was nothing dramatic, nothing loud, only the quiet settling of someone who had not slept in safety for a long time. After several minutes, the light inside dimmed. She had blown out the lantern. The silence that followed was peaceful. Samuel stayed exactly where he promised he would. He gave her the comfort of knowing someone was nearby, not to disturb her, but to guard her peace. As the stars brightened overhead, he realized something had shifted inside him again. Her silence was no longer just caution. It was a kind of strength he deeply respected. And he knew, without fully understanding why, that helping her was not just an act of kindness anymore. It was something meaningful, something that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could see yet. Morning arrived quietly at the ranch. A thin layer of light spread over the hills before the sun fully rose. The air carried a soft chill, the kind that made the world feel fresh and new. Samuel had not slept much during the night. He stayed near the shed just as he promised, resting on the wooden crate with his back against the barn wall. Every time he closed his eyes, he listened carefully to make sure Nienna was safe and comfortable. By the time dawn came, he felt tired but peaceful. Keeping watch had not been a burden, it felt like the right thing to do. When the first rays of sunlight touched the shed's small window, Samuel heard gentle movement inside. He stood up slowly, stretching his stiff legs. He didn't want to knock or speak too soon. She needed to wake up at her own pace. After a few quiet minutes, the shed door opened a few inches, and Nienna peeked out. Her hair was slightly messy from sleep, and the blanket he gave her was wrapped around her shoulders. She seemed surprised to see Samuel still there. Most people would have left after offering a place to sleep. The fact that he kept his word touched her in a way she didn't show openly. But Samuel felt something soften in her gaze. "You stayed," she said in a calm voice. "I told you I would," he replied with a small smile. She nodded slightly, almost shyly, then stepped out of the shed. The morning air brushed against her face, and for the first time since he met her, she looked rested. Her eyes were clearer, her shoulders were less tense, and even though her clothes were still worn, she no longer looked like someone running from danger. She looked like someone trying to rebuild herself. Samuel gestured toward the pump near the barn. "You can wash your face there," he said gently. "Clean water." Nienna walked toward it, and Samuel stepped back to give her privacy. She pumped the handle and watched the cold water spill out. She cupped her hands, letting the water run across her face, feeling the coolness refresh her skin. The simple act of washing, after so many days of constant traveling, felt like a gift. While she cleaned up, Samuel walked to the house and returned with a small wooden box. Inside were sewing tools, needles, thread, and pieces of soft fabric his mother had used many years ago. The box had been tucked away in a cabinet, untouched for a long time. When he brought it outside, he set it gently on the bench where Nienna had sat the previous evening. When she returned from the pump, she paused when she saw the box. Her eyes shifted from the box to Samuel, questioning. "My mother used these," he explained softly. "There's fabric inside. You can repair your dress if you want." She looked down at her torn dress, then at the box again. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether she should accept such a personal gift. But Samuel spoke again, his voice warm and simple. "She would have wanted someone to use them," he said. "They shouldn't just sit there and gather dust." Nienna reached out slowly and touched the box. Her fingers brushed over the wooden lid, almost as if she were afraid of damaging it. She opened it carefully, revealing the small treasures inside. The pieces of cloth were soft, some patterned, some plain. The threads were neatly rolled, and the needles were arranged in a small leather strip. It was more than she expected. It was more care than she had received from anyone in a long time. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying real emotion behind it. Samuel nodded. "Take your time. You can sit anywhere you feel comfortable." She sat on the bench and placed the torn part of her dress across her lap. The blanket still covered most of her, but she uncovered just enough to begin stitching. Her hands moved with skill, though she worked slowly, making sure each stitch was tight and careful. Samuel watched for a short moment but did not hover. He wanted her to feel free, not observed, so he walked a little distance away and began feeding the horses, giving her space while still being close if she needed anything. As Nienna repaired her dress, she occasionally glanced up at the peaceful ranch around her. The morning sun warmed the ground. Birds hopped near the fence. The dog lay under a tree, watching her with friendly eyes. For once, she felt no need to hurry anywhere. For once, the world did not feel threatening. That feeling was rare for her. After some time, she spoke without lifting her head. "You live alone here?" Samuel turned toward her. "Yes," he said. "My parents passed away years ago, and the ranch has been mine since then." She nodded slowly, as if understanding something about him. People who lived alone often knew how to be gentle. They understood silence and respected it. After a few minutes, she continued stitching, and a quiet calm settled between them again. When she finished repairing one tear, she moved to the next. The dress was badly torn in several places, but the pieces of fabric Samuel had given her made it easier to fix. She blended them with her own cloth, making something new out of something damaged. Later, while she worked, Samuel returned with a small cup of warm tea. He didn't want to startle her, so he approached slowly. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and he offered the cup with a kind smile. "It's warm," he said. "It might help." She accepted it, wrapping her hands around the cup, feeling the heat warm her fingers. She tasted it carefully. The tea was mild and slightly sweet. She closed her eyes for a moment, grateful for the warmth. Samuel sat on a nearby stool, far enough not to crowd her but close enough to talk. "If you don't mind," he said gently, "how did your dress get torn so badly?" She set the cup down slowly. Her expression grew thoughtful, touched by memories she did not often share. After a long pause, she began to speak. "I was with a small group," she said in a soft, steady voice. "We traveled far. We were looking for new land, safer places, but we became separated. I walked for days trying to find them again." Samuel listened quietly, not interrupting. She continued stitching as she spoke, her hands steady even though her voice occasionally wavered. "There were thorn bushes," she said. "Rough ground, sharp branches. My dress caught many times. I tried to fix it, but I had nothing left." Her words painted a picture: long days under the hot sun, nights filled with cold winds, miles of rough land, and the loneliness of not knowing where her people had gone. "You went through all that alone?" Samuel asked softly. She nodded, not bragging, simply stating a fact. Stopping meant danger. Samuel felt a slow heaviness in his chest, a mix of respect and sadness. She had walked through hardship without asking anyone for help. He admired her courage deeply. "You're very strong," he said. She paused for a moment and looked at him. There was no pride in her eyes, only quiet truth. "I do what I must," she replied. As the day continued, she repaired more and more of her dress. Samuel brought more water, then returned to his chores, giving her time to work. Occasionally, she watched him from the corner of her eye, how he moved, how he treated the animals gently, how he glanced at her from afar to make sure she was comfortable. After some hours, she finished stitching the largest tear. She ran her fingers along the repaired seam, impressed with the new strength it carried. She lifted her head and looked at Samuel. "This dress will last longer now," she said softly. "It deserved a second chance," Samuel replied, smiling. She looked at him for a moment, and he felt something warm pass between them. A feeling of trust growing slowly, like a small plant pushing through the soil. In the afternoon, when the sun was high, Samuel brought out a small stool and set it in the shade. "You can rest now," he said. "You've worked enough for one morning." She hesitated, then nodded. As she sat, she realized how tired her hands had become. Samuel noticed and brought out a small cloth to wipe the dust from her fingers. She didn't pull away. She let him help. It was a silent acceptance of kindness. For the first time since arriving, she allowed her body to fully relax. The wind brushed against her hair. The ranch felt peaceful. She felt safe. She looked at Samuel and said softly, "You, listen. Many do not." Samuel met her gaze with calm honesty. "If someone has walked a hard road," he said, "the least I can do is listen." She held his gaze for a long moment. Something inside her, something small but important, finally settled. For the first time in many days, she felt she was no longer walking alone. The next morning came with soft clouds and a gentle breeze sweeping over the ranch. Samuel had woken early, as he always did, feeding the horses and checking the fences before the sun reached its full height. While he worked, he kept glancing toward the bench where Nienna sat the previous day, half expecting her to already be there, repairing her dress or sitting quietly with her thoughts. But the bench was empty. For a moment, a small worry tightened in his chest. He wondered if she had left before daylight, choosing to continue her journey without saying anything. But the worry faded when he looked toward the shed and saw the door slightly open. A faint movement inside told him she was awake. He didn't want to rush her, so he continued his chores a little longer. After some time, the shed door opened wider, and she stepped out slowly, holding the repaired dress in her hands. She had spent part of the night finishing the stitching, and the fabric now looked whole, neat, and much stronger. The patches blended in beautifully, thanks to the soft cloth Samuel had given her. She stood in the sunlight, letting the morning air touch her face. Samuel watched her from a distance. She seemed more at peace, but also thoughtful, as if deciding something quietly in her heart. When she noticed him watching, she walked toward him with calm, steady steps. "You woke early," she said softly. "I usually do," Samuel replied, smiling. "It's easier to start work before the heat arrives." She nodded, understanding. Life on the land was always tied to the sun. "You slept well?" he asked gently. She paused for a moment before answering. "Yes," she said. "I felt safe." The simplicity of her words held great weight. Samuel felt something warm spread through him. He didn't show it too strongly, but inside he appreciated the trust she had slowly begun to place in him. As they talked, the border collie approached them, tail wagging. The dog circled around Nienna and then sat beside her, looking up at her as if claiming her as a new friend. She reached down and touched the dog's head gently. It was such a small, quiet moment, yet it carried a sense of belonging. Samuel watched her for a few moments before speaking again. "If you'd like," he said, "you can help me with some tasks around the ranch today. Only if you want to." "What kind of tasks?" she asked, curious but cautious. "Simple things," he explained. "Collecting eggs, helping water the garden, maybe brushing one of the calmer horses, nothing heavy. She considered it. Helping meant she wasn't just receiving kindness, she was contributing. That mattered to her. Independence was part of who she was. "I will help," she said gently. They walked together toward the small chicken coop. Samuel showed her how to gather eggs without startling the hens. She moved quietly and carefully, her soft manner making the animals comfortable around her. She collected the eggs with surprising grace, as if she had done similar work before. Samuel found himself watching her more than he meant to. Something about the calm way she moved made the morning feel peaceful. After they finished gathering eggs, he led her toward the garden. The plants were small but healthy, growing in neat rows. She watered them with slow, deliberate motions, making sure each plant received just enough. The simple task seemed to give her a sense of calm. For the first time in days, she was not running, not struggling, not worrying about the next moment. She was simply living it. Samuel stayed nearby, repairing a loose fence board while she worked. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them was gentle, not heavy. It felt like two people sharing the same space without needing to fill the air with words. Later, he brought out one of his calmest horses, a brown mare named Willow. The horse was gentle, patient, and known for her soft nature. Samuel held the reins and nodded toward the horse. "She's friendly," he said. "If you want, you can brush her. She won't get startled." Nienna hesitated at first. Horses were powerful animals, and she respected their strength. But when she stepped closer, Willow lowered her head slightly, as if greeting her. Nienna touched the horse's neck gently, then began brushing her coat in long, even strokes. Willow stood still, enjoying the attention. Samuel felt a soft smile forming as he watched the scene. Something about seeing Nienna comfortable with the animals made him feel unexpectedly happy. She fit into the ranch life naturally, without forcing anything. As she brushed the horse, Samuel approached slowly so he wouldn't interrupt her peaceful rhythm. "Is the dress holding together well?" he asked. She nodded. "Stronger now. Better than before." "I'm glad," he said. "You did a good job repairing it." "You gave good cloth," she replied simply. Their eyes met briefly. There was something unspoken in the moment, something warm, something respectful. Around midday, clouds gathered suddenly, and a cool wind swept across the field. Samuel looked at the sky and frowned slightly. "Storm's coming," he murmured. "We should head inside." The clouds darkened fast. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Nienna stiffened a little, not because of fear, but because storms reminded her of nights spent outside without shelter. Samuel noticed her reaction and spoke gently. "You don't have to go far," he assured her. "You can come inside the house until it passes." She looked toward the ranch house. It was sturdy, warm-looking, but also unfamiliar. Stepping inside a stranger's home was a big decision. She hesitated for several long seconds. The first raindrops fell soft at first, then heavier. Samuel didn't pressure her. He simply opened the door and stood aside. "Only if you want to," he said in a calm voice. "You won't be bothered inside. It's dry, and there's a fire." Lightning flashed, followed by a closer rumble of thunder. The rain grew stronger, falling in thick drops. She finally stepped forward, not because she was afraid, but because she trusted him enough to believe the house was a safe place. Inside, the room was warm and smelled faintly of wood smoke. A quilt lay folded on a chair, and simple furniture filled the space. Nienna stood near the doorway for a moment, just taking it all in. The place was clean but humble, lived in but peaceful. "You can sit anywhere," Samuel said, lighting the small fireplace. "Make yourself comfortable." She moved toward the quilt and touched the stitching lightly. "Your mother made this?" she asked. "Yes," Samuel replied softly. She liked sewing. She said, "A home always needs a warm quilt." "It is beautiful," she whispered. The storm outside grew louder. Rain struck the roof in steady waves. Thunder rolled across the hills. But inside, the fire crackled, creating a warm glow that softened the room. Samuel brought 2 cups of warm tea and handed one to her. She accepted it with quiet gratitude. For a while, they sat without speaking, simply listening to the storm. There was comfort in the silence. Nienna felt something she hadn't felt in many nights: safety. The fear of being alone in wind and rain was gone. She was indoors, sheltered, and no one wanted anything from her except for her to rest. After some time, she looked at Samuel with a thoughtful expression. "You open your home to me," she said softly. "You do not know me." Samuel met her eyes with gentle honesty. "Sometimes, you don't need to know everything," he replied. "Sometimes, you just feel when someone needs a little kindness." She lowered her gaze, touched by his sincerity. The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the calm that had slowly replaced her earlier worry. "Not many offer kindness," she said quietly. "Maybe not enough people try," Samuel answered. A soft smile formed on her lips, small, but full of meaning. She held the warm cup between her hands and allowed herself to fully relax. For once, the storm outside didn't frighten her. For once, she wasn't thinking about where she needed to go next. She was simply here, safe, warm, and for the first time in a long while, she felt she could breathe without fear. When the storm finally passed, the ranch felt washed clean. The air outside was cool and smelled of wet earth and fresh grass. The clouds drifted apart slowly, letting rays of sunlight spill across the land once again. Inside the house, the fire had softened to glowing embers, filling the room with gentle warmth. Nienna sat quietly near the window, watching the last drops of rain slide down the glass. For a long while, she simply breathed, letting the peace of the moment settle into her heart. She had not expected to stay so long in one place. Her journey had been filled with movement, always walking, always searching, always bracing herself for danger. But here, in this humble ranch house, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Rest. Real rest. Not just sleep, but safety, warmth, and the feeling of belonging, even if only for a short time. Samuel stood near the fireplace, adjusting a few logs to keep the room warm. He noticed the calm expression on her face and felt relieved that she was finally able to breathe without fear. She had been through so much, and seeing her at ease gave him a quiet happiness he couldn't fully explain. "Storm's gone," he said gently. "The sun's coming back." She turned her head slightly and nodded. "It sounds peaceful now." Samuel walked over and stood beside the window. Together, they watched the light spread across the wet fields. He glanced at her and spoke softly. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Nienna. There is no rush." She looked down at her repaired dress resting over her lap, running her fingers across the stitched fabric. "I have walked many days," she said quietly. "I did not know when I would stop." Samuel listened with care. "Sometimes," he said, "you don't stop because you want to. You stop because you finally find a place that feels right." She lifted her eyes to him, her gaze steady. "You say this place is right?" "To come and to who by? For safety, yes," he answered gently. "And for peace." She looked around the small room, the quilt on the chair, the wooden walls that had sheltered countless storms, the tidy shelves, the warm shape of the dog curled near the hearth, and the quiet presence of the man who had given her more kindness in 2 days than she had received in months. Her voice softened. "This place is quiet." "Quiet can be good," Samuel replied with a small smile. She didn't speak for a long moment, thinking deeply. When she did, her voice held a quiet strength. "I want to stay. Not forever. But until I am ready." Samuel felt a subtle warmth spread through his chest. He didn't smile broadly. He was not a man who showed too much emotion outwardly, but his eyes softened. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "There's no hurry here." He meant those words, and she believed him. Later that day, when the rain had dried enough to walk outside, Nienna stepped out into the open air. The ranch looked different now. Brighter, cleaner, alive. Birds hopped around on the wet ground, picking at seeds and insects. The horses grazed peacefully, their coats shining with leftover raindrops. The smell of damp soil filled the air with something comforting and real. She walked slowly across the field, letting the breeze brush past her. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel like she was being chased by fate or pushed forward by hardship. She felt free, even if that freedom was gentle and quiet. Samuel followed her at a respectful distance, giving her space to explore without feeling watched. When she turned back toward him, he walked closer, but not too close. "It is beautiful after the rain," she said. "It always is," he replied. They walked toward the corral, where Willow, the gentle mare, lifted her head in greeting. Nienna reached out and stroked the horse's neck. Willow leaned into her touch, remembering the kindness from the day before. There was a natural connection between them, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. "You have good horses," she said. "They're good because they're treated well," Samuel replied. "Animals know when they're safe." Nienna looked at him after he said that. "People know too," she murmured, almost under her breath. Samuel met her gaze with warmth. He didn't say anything more, but the moment held meaning. A simple truth had passed between them. Kindness matters, and it changes lives. The afternoon passed gently. They worked together on small tasks around the ranch. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they simply moved in silence. But even their silence felt like a form of conversation, quiet, steady, honest. While they worked, small things happened that only strengthened the bond forming slowly between them. When Samuel handed her tools, their fingers brushed lightly, and both felt a small jolt of awareness. When she laughed softly at the dog's playful behavior, Samuel felt a rare sense of joy spread through him. When she concentrated deeply on repairing a tear in her own woven bag, he admired her determination. And when the wind lifted her hair briefly, revealing the full strength in her eyes, he realized something surprising. He genuinely liked having her here. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with pink and gold, they stood side by side watching the light fade across the hills. Samuel broke the silence first. "Do you know where you'll go when you're ready to travel again?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "No. My people moved far. I do not know their path now." "You don't have to decide right away," Samuel said. "This land is big. There's time to think." She nodded, appreciating the space he gave her. He didn't try to pressure her into staying forever, and he didn't treat her like a helpless traveler. He treated her with respect, the same respect she always carried within herself. After a long pause, she spoke softly. "You saved me from walking alone." Samuel shook his head gently. "You were never weak," he said. "All I did was offer a little shelter." She looked at him with quiet sincerity. "Shelter is not little," she replied. "Shelter is life." Those words touched him deeply. Her gratitude wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, honest, real, very much like her. The sun dropped lower, and the first stars appeared. Together, they walked back toward the house. The dog trotted happily beside them. The ranch lights glowed softly in the growing dark. When they reached the porch, Nienna stopped and looked at Samuel with a calm, steady expression. "I will stay," she said again, "until my heart feels strong enough to move." Samuel nodded slowly. "Take all the time you need." She stepped inside the warm house, carrying a sense of peace she had not felt in months. Samuel followed, closing the door gently behind them. And in that simple closing of the door, something unspoken but important settled between them, a feeling that her arrival was not an accident, and his help was not a small act. It was the beginning of a quiet, steady bond that neither of them expected but both of them needed. Sometimes a single moment like seeing a woman washing clothes by a river with a torn dress changes the path of two lives forever. And for Samuel and Nienna, that moment became the start of a new journey, built not from fear or loneliness, but from kindness, trust, and the simple courage to stay.